Hey yo, what's poppin' fellas? My name's Fizzy, and today I'm going to be going over some PvP related content that I feel that there's a lot of bad information about circulating around the Wiz community. First off, I want to address that this won't be an all-encompassing video on the barriers to enter PvP, or the state and issues of PvP, because I feel like there's a whole lot to discuss on those topics, and it's better to save those for an entirely different video. I'm by no means the best at PvP, hell, I argue like I'm pretty average, but I do understand the mechanics, and I feel like there are many people spreading false information about the mechanics and how to properly play the game among the Wizard101 PvP community. I've wasted hours upon hours testing dual school strats in PvP, and I think it's time for me to share what I found. The first thing I think everyone should understand is, what is Rochambeau? Essentially, Rochambeau is a fancy way to say rock, paper, scissors. It's one of the latest mechanics that KingsIsle has been pushing to create the meta around, and each school has a certain other type of school that it synergizes with in a forwards and a backwards compatibility, according to the Rochambeau wheel. The general idea is that every school has a Gambit identity according to the schools that you duel into. So, what the hell is a Gambit? Gambits specifically refer to the spells that when a certain condition is met, it will perform an action. Each school has multiple low-pip gambits that they can utilize in an attempt to set up their large damage-dealing gambits. These large damage-dealing gambits, there are 3 of, and each school has unique, different variations, each with different varying names. For simplicity's sake, I will be referring to these spells as the specific school, followed by Scion, which refers to the tree, Jinn, which refers to the genie, and Oni, which refers to the elephant. Let's go over which schools have what Gambit identities. Bear with me because this will get confusing. Each school has similar spells based off the Rochambeau wheel, and their dual school compatible identities. The Blade identities are Storm, Death, and Life. The Weakness identity schools are Storm, Death, and Ice. The Shield identity schools are Myth, Ice, and Death. The Trap identity schools are Myth, Fire, and Ice. The damage over time, or dot identity schools, are Life, Myth, and Fire, whereas the heal over time identity schools are Life, Fire, and Storm. Balance is unique with their own conditionals based on the identity that they have as the pip management school, and the new mechanic called Echo, which copies blades and traps and weaknesses from the opponent and yourself onto the other, and vice versa. Now, let's take a closer look at how these gambits work. Let's look at the Storm, for example. True to their identity as the highest DPP school, they have the highest damage gambits among the schools, and each one doubles in damage when the conditions are met. First, let's look at Storm Scion. This spell gambits off of 4 blades placed on yourself. Simple enough, right? You're Storm, you blade, you do damage. When this condition is met, it does a whopping 2.5k damage base. Next up is a Storm Oni. This spell is very similar with the same damage output, but the condition is different. It's met by having 4 weaknesses on the opponent. Now you might be thinking, weaknesses? That's not fitting for a damage dealing school. That's because this is where the dual school identity and the Rochambeau wheel comes into play. Storm's backwards compatible school and their hardest counter is Death. Death's main identity is, you guessed it, weaknesses. See where this is going? Finally, we have perhaps the most situational and, in my opinion, interesting Storm Gambit, the Jinn. The Storm Jinn utilizes their forwards compatible school, Life, and gambits double damage when you have 2 healing over times, otherwise referred to as HOTS, placed on you. Unfortunately, because of the situational status of being unable to use HOTS in Strike, and the lower base damage of the 1.6k when gambited as opposed to the 2.5 for the Tree and the Oni, this spell is rarely used in PvP, unless in some very unique situations. I hope that you're still following me. Now, what does all this have to do with doing damage off school? Well, with the information provided, maybe you came to the same conclusion as me. Isn't a defensive school that shares identities with an offensive school just a stronger option? Well, simply put, at the moment, yeah, it is true. There's quite a balancing issue right now because of the current advanced combat stat caps that makes a Death dual schooling into Storm damage or a Life dual schooling into either direction of their Rochambeau wheel with Fire or Storm an overall stronger school than just a regular Fire or Storm doing damage, simply because they can do the immense amount of damages of their dual school while still retaining their original defensive stats. This is problematic, and I have a few suggestions for KingsIsle to solve these issues, but I feel that I should probably save that for a different video covering the state of PvP and what and how balancing problems can be solved, because there is no shortage of issues with PvP at the moment. So let's move on. So how do we counter these hard-hitting Gambits from being set up? Well, each school has a counter identity, with 3-pip Gambit spells, or Gambits on the spell-limited versions of trainable spells through Arc 1, Arc 2, and Arc 3. For example, Life counters traps and damage over times. Storm counters heal over times and damage over times. Death counters heal over times and blades. Ice counters weaknesses and blades. Myth counters weaknesses and shields. And Fire counters shields and traps. Following this, you can get the basic idea of the counter matchups and which schools should never lose to a certain strat against their counter. So how does this look in practice? Unfortunately, the most effective way to dual school currently is using a PvE strat. I'm personally not a fan of these strats as I feel they're very stale and don't encourage entertaining gameplay. There are a few ways KingsIsle could combat these strats from being viable, although most of these would completely gut the dual schooling as we know in its current state, and require KingsIsle to reevaluate how they implement dual schooling as an entire system. Again, I'll have an entire video covering that out eventually, but for any KingsIsle devs interested in immediate feedback, feel free to reach out to me, and I will be sure to give you some feedback and some ideas on what I think could benefit the community. So, let's hop into PvP and see what it looks like in an actual game. afforded to everything but Storm.